So hi everybody, this is Bill Bittner. Today is Monday, October 11th, 2021, and I'm going to be taking you through a session on VMARC. VMARC, if you're not familiar with it, it's a compacting and archiving tool, kind of similar to creating a zip file or a tarball. John Fisher is the original author for this. It compresses very well, better than the default copy file command with the pack option in most cases. Maybe not quite as good as terse on some cases, but again, that probably varies depending on some things. There's also different options you can use with VMARC in terms of what compression gets used. But by the default, you'll get good compression with it. The other nice thing about it is you can bundle or package a set of files into one CMS file, much like a zip file. So we'll often use this with clients if they're gathering problem determination data for us. Maybe we want the consoles from several virtual machines. Well, let's put them in a VMARC, compress them and bundle them there so they're sending us one file as opposed to 12 or whatever the number might be, right? So some good advantages to using that. The VM download page has additional information on it. The VMARC module is there. There are some things that you would have to do when you get that VMARC module to make sure that it is in a format that can run, right? And so that's listed here. It's also in more detail in the download page there. Now, I typically use VMARC with one of three functions. Either I'm creating one, so I'm packing files into a VMARC file, looking at them. So the list function lets me see what files are in an archive, and then unpacking, right? There are a couple other options that I'll use sometimes if I'm creating them. That's replace and append. That is whether I want to add a new file to the archive or replace a file that's in there, if I'm updating a package, something of that nature, right? So some other things that we'll look at here is when I get a VMARC file, sometimes it doesn't unpack, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll show you some examples. So by default, the file should be lrecl fixed, right? So when you get your VMARC file, if it's not that, you want to do some things to try to make that so. Now, there's a couple different strategies on this. I'm going to share my approach to it, and that's to use this pipe statement here. So I'll take the file that I believe is a VMARC file. I'll use fblock to make it a fixed block of 80 bytes, and then put it out to this new file with the F at the end to make it fixed, right? Now, technically, it doesn't have to be fixed. It often works if it's variable, but I find that making it fixed, which is what, when you generate it, it's going to be, just makes it easier for debug in a couple different ways. Now, I know some people like to put fblock 80 and then a 0 or a pair of zeros after that to buffer or fill in any missing bytes to try to make that 80 record length. I don't do that because by leaving that off, if the file isn't an increment of 80 bytes, I'm going to get an error message, right? And that tells me or gives me a hint that something else happened somewhere along the way, right? Now, often things will still work with that filler in the 0, but there are those cases where I think it's going to work, but there's really something still wrong with it. Just kind of a footnote, some trivia. lrecl 80 is the default when you build a VMARC file. There are a few out there because there is an option with VMARC to pack or create an archive that has a different lrecl than 80, right? But lrecl 80 is the default. So unless you've created it differently, just go with the default. When I browse a file or exedit a file, one of the things I'm going to look for is an eye catcher that starts out with :CFF and then some characters in there and then the file name, right? And so for each compacted file in an archive file, you'll see one of these strings here, and it should be at the start of a record, right? So that's a good clue. If you're working with a file and it doesn't look quite right, that's something that I'll look at to try to get a sense of what may have gone wrong, right, in different ways. Now, I have run into a couple FTP or file transfer programs that play games with an end of record. So whether, the line feed carriage return and how they are handled in transferring a file. I'll talk about that a little bit later on when we look at an example here. All right, so I have a VMARC file here. Actually, you see several here. And VMARC is the command to manage this. List is what option I want to do on that. And then just slash, because I'm doing it on that given file there, right? And you'll see in this case here, I have a number of different files that are in there. That's going to tell me how many bytes they were. Now, since I'm not uncompacting them or taking them out at anything, that's just going to show zeros there for now, right? But this is often what I'll do when I get a VMARC file just to see, how readable is it. In this case, I happen to know that, yeah, there were a whole bunch of files there to be dealt with, right? Now, I may want to do something where I unpack part of that. So I'm going to do a VMARC unpack on CP3K VMXT mark. And in this example, I'm just going to unpack the one file. All right, and so in this case, it tells me, how much it was coming in, and you can kind of see how much it was able to compact it. And now that file is there now on that B disk where I put it. And by default, it's going to save the date there on that. Now, if I want to unpack the entire thing, I can just say equal, and then the file mode where I want it to go to. In this case, you're going to see it unpacks all those files in there, right? Puts it out. Now, in this case, it warns me that the one file already exists, right? So it doesn't overwrite that. Okay. So let's go back to these VMARC files that are out there, right? Now, I have a couple. Here's one that was transferred kind of funny. And as you see, it doesn't have that :CFF eye catcher up here. And some other things look a little funny, right? And so I know in this case that something went wrong. And in particular, this was one where instead of moving it around as binary, somewhere along the way, I changed it to move it as text, right? And so some things got translated that shouldn't have gotten translated. And even if I make that into a fixed ANY, you're going to see the same sort of thing, right? And if I ask VMARC to look at it, it's going to say there's nothing in there that I know how to read, right? So here's one where I've transferred it, but I didn't make it LRECL, right? So I can look in here again, and then I see, what I expect to see, the :CFF, and then I'll see the names in here, right? Now, part of what I can do also is, if I look for that tag, so I'm going to do a column locate. Some of you may not have used this exedit command before, but this is going to locate in the record and in a column where this string is, right? So the first one is the one that we see right here on the screen, CFF for the CP3K VM extract exec, right? If I repeat that though, I'm going to see there's another one in that record, but it's way out, if you look up here, in column 12,881. So I have a file that's eye catcher is not at the start of a record, and so VMARC is going to do well with that, right? So if I do a VMARC list on that guy, it will find that first file, right? Because its eye catcher is where it's supposed to be, its header information is where it's supposed to be, but nothing after that, right? And so in one sense, this looks like I'm getting return code 0, but I'm going to miss all those other files. So that's something, if you get a really big file that should have a lot of different files in it, it's one way to watch for that. And so what we want to do is, as I showed earlier, we're going to use that pipe command to make that into block, right, of any records in fixed format. And we're good with that now, right? So if I go to the top and do my clocate again, I'll see, line 1, column 1 is my first one there. If I do a second one, I'm down in 162, and again, column 1, I'm going to see that throughout this file, right? And now you can see that this is a good one. It has all the files in there that I care about and is in good shape. I mentioned earlier that one scenario was some weird file transfer things where they essentially insert an extra character at the end of a record because of line feed carriage return instead of just doing a carriage return. And what that's going to end up looking like, and I don't have an example here because I don't have that type of file transfer program, but what you'll see is that colon CFF ends up getting offset by just a little bit, right? And so that's something to watch for. The other thing I wanted to show was for this bad one here, it was transferred incorrectly as text or ASCII in EPSIDEC. If I do that F block, ANY, right, it's going to tell me that we end up with a record that's 37 bytes, right? So not the 80 bytes that I need, and I had to pad it. If I use the 00 there as a filler, I'm not going to get that error message, and I might end up wasting some time that I don't need to waste, right? So I know other people have other reasons for wanting to do that padding, but I choose not to because of debug. All right. I mentioned the variable record length, right? So we have a V here for this good one. You'll see that it also still picks up other things, but with variable length records, I just find it more complex when I'm doing debugging in terms of what can change and how to manipulate it, right? So keep it to fix that. That's what it's really intended to be. All right. So that's what I had for you today.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos like this one. Have a suggestion for another video topic? Feel free to leave a comment below.